2, 1, action.
Good afternoon or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's John McCall here, John McCall Senior, John McCall Junior's father, and I'm going to present again, but a better version of the history of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. So here goes. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, or NICRA for short, was formed in 1967 and began campaigning for reforms in voting rights, housing allocation and policing. The ongoing civil rights campaign in the United States of America provided the new group with much of its inspiration. At the same time, there were other sources of encouragement in the period following NICRA's establishment, notably the student demonstrations that took place in France during May 1968. Now, what particularly appealed to NICRA's leaders, what particularly appealed to NICRA's leaders was the American group's use of non-violent methods of civil disobedience as part of its campaign to achieve equality for black people. Now, most importantly, by 1967, a series of marches and protests had led the US Congress to pass laws outlawing public discrimination and guaranteeing voting rights. And these successes were widely reported in Europe. Now, what were the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association's aims? Well, NICRA claimed to be open to both Protestants and Catholics, and also stated that it was not trying to create a united Ireland. Its aims were as follows. Number one, achieve one man, one vote for local council elections. If this was introduced, anyone over the age of 18 would be allowed to vote. One man, one vote would also end the practice of giving multiple votes to business owners. Number two, ensure that local councils allocated their houses fairly. At this time, only those who paid rates were allowed to vote in local council elections. If councils did not give Catholics houses, then they could not vote. Number three, stop the practice of gerrymandering. Number four, ensure that religion was not used as a factor when allocating government jobs. Number five, end the use of the Special Powers Act, a particularly draconian piece of legislation. Disband the B Specials. The B Specials were basically a 100% Protestant militia and an arm of the Unionist government. Number six, introduce a system that allowed people to report local council violations in any of the above areas, and basically what people were doing was they were looking for an ombudsman. What about support and opposition? Well, NICRA received support from different sections of the Northern Ireland public. These included a new generation of Catholics who had been able to attend secondary school free of charge as a result of the introduction of the 11 plus examination in 1947. Those nationalists who believed that the local Nationalist Party, led by Eddie McAteer, had lost touch with the needs of its people, that it was basically obsolete, that it was ineffective. Modern Unionists who believed that Northern Ireland's Catholics were being treated unfairly. These liberal Unionists also believed that if NICRA's aims were achieved, there'd be no reason for Catholics to want to be part of United Ireland. Other groups and individuals, including academics and trades unionists. Now, opposition to NICRA came from a large section of the Unionist population. They feared that NICRA was nothing more than the IRA under a different name, even though the IRA was basically not in existence at this time. NICRA was not interested in equality for everyone in Northern Ireland. Instead, it was only looking out for the needs of Catholics. They were also afraid that NICRA's campaign could weaken Protestant control of Northern Ireland, thus leading to United Ireland. So on the 24th of August 1968, NICRA's first march was held in County Tyrone. The march began in Dungannon and ended in Coal Island, and ended in Dungannon, and was really based on Martin Luther King's Selma Montgomery March. The reason why these two places were chosen as the location of the first march was to protest that Dungannon Council's decision to allocate one of its council houses in the small village of Caledon to a 19-year-old Protestant woman rather than a large Catholic family. The Coal Island Dungannon March passed off peacefully. However, things were not quite so peaceful at NICRA's second march held in Derry on the 5th of October 1968. Again, the march was organised to draw attention to what NICRA saw as discrimination, in this case Londonderry Corporation's housing policy. Some of Derry's Protestant population were very unhappy with NICRA's plans, and so the city's apprentice boys announced plans to hold their own demonstration at the same time. Now, fearing an outbreak of violence, the Stormont government banned both marches. However, NICRA let it be known that it would ignore this ban. NICRA's march started at Duke Street in Derry's waterside area. As it moved up Duke Street towards the Craigavon Bridge, accompanied by 4 Westminster MPs and a radio television camera crew, the protesters were faced by lines of police officers. Some of the police were heavy-handed in their efforts to stop the march. Their tactics were captured by the radio television crew, and the resulting images were widely seen at home and abroad. Further, NICRA marches made the situation even worse. Quite often violence erupted. There were several reasons for this. NICRA continued with marches even after they had been banned. Some marches went through Protestant areas, and this was seen as provocative. And counter-demonstrations organised by unionists sometimes came into contact with NICRA's marches. Next, I want to talk a wee bit about Captain Terence O'Neill's reform programme. As a result of this unrest, Captain Terence O'Neill, the then Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, assisted by Brian Faulkner and William Craig, were summoned to Westminster on the 4th of November to meet the British Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson. The outcome was the announcement of a 5-point reform programme on the 22nd of November 1968. Number 1, a point system would be introduced to ensure fair allocation of council houses. Number 2, Londonderry Corporation was to be replaced by a development commission. Number 3, some parts of the 1922 Special Powers Act would be removed. Number 4, the removal of additional votes for owners of businesses, along with other reforms to the operation of local government. And number 5, the establishment of an ombudsman to examine complaints. Now, it was stated that all of these reforms would be put in place by late 1971. But despite the announcement of the reform programme, protests and counter-protests continued. O'Neill therefore decided to appear on television in an attempt to bring home to people the dangerous situation that Northern Ireland now found itself facing. In his address, the Prime Minister made a particular appeal to NICRA's leaders to help avoid chaos. This became known as the Ulster at the Crossroads speech. In the short term, O'Neill's television broadcast seemed to work as NICRA marches were called off. At the same time, however, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland found himself facing opposition from inside and outside his own party. William Craig, the Minister for Home Affairs, criticised O'Neill's television appearance and accused his leader of doing what the London government told him to do. O'Neill responded by sacking Craig, but this did not deter opposition. Many unionists opposed the 5-point reform programme. They believed that O'Neill had only made the concessions due to the threat of violence and felt the reforms would weaken unionist control of Northern Ireland. Now, NICRA might have agreed to stop marching in response to O'Neill's television appeal. However, others were not so willing to stop protesting against what they saw as injustice, and one particular group was the recently formed People's Democracy. People's Democracy, or PD for short, had been established by university students in Queen's University, among others, in the aftermath of the police attack on the NICRA March in Derry on the 5th of October 1968. Its leading figures were Michael Farrell, Bernadette Devlin, Eamon McCann, and a cousin of mine, Rory McShane. Included those guys who was elected. And now Bernadette Devlin was elected Westminster MP for Mid Ulster in April 1969 while still a student at Queen's University. And at the same time, the group believed that these aims would only happen if a socialist republic was set up in Northern Ireland. One man, one vote, fair boundaries, houses on need, jobs on merit, freedom of speech, and repeal of the Special Powers Act. They're unhappy with what it saw as the limited nature of the 5-point reform programme. People's Democracy decided to hold a march between Belfast and Derry. This was a direct echo of the US civil rights movement's 1965 marches from Selma to Montgomery. The march was condemned by NICRA and nationalist leaders, fearing its impact on an already tense situation. These condemnations were ignored and the march began on 1st of January 1969. As the organisers had planned to go through a number of Protestant areas, the police enforced a number of changes to the route so as to avoid confrontations. Now, despite this, the protesters faced a number of attacks. The worst of these took place at Burntollet Bridge on the outskirts of Derry on the 4th of January 1969. Eyewitness evidence suggests that the police stood by and allowed the attack to continue. Tensions increased as reports of the ambush emerged, and these tensions increased further when later on the same day some police ran riot through nationalist areas of Derry.